Is a 30-year veteran of on-the-ground response, also one of the leaders of Strong Angel, and he's put together a fabulous panel on making that transition from research to operations.
Please take 5 minutes. Biology is working, copy, all that.
Good man. There's so much we have to do.
There's a plan.
I'm going to write one word on the board.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cool term that may be unfamiliar to most of you.
So anyway, Bruce has been friends for a long time.
Arnold mentioned a Welsh word having to do with kind of scenario management and planning. Scenario management and planning. That's the word. The guy who developed the model at the University of Swansea in Wales wrote the Wikipedia article on it. And he has kept it updated. It's really interesting. The actual word is related to how sheep find their home. So I think he was drinking. But the end result is something that, for example, the Singapore group, RAS, the Risk Assessment and Horizon Scanning Center, has found a very powerful tool. And Singapore, for the Prime Minister's office, wrote a book on this and how they're using it for foresight. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Who needs this? Thanks. Hi, I'm Eric Rasmussen. And what we're going to talk about on a panel that will be just as good as all of the other equally good panels that have gone before is how you take something from concept to response plan integration. So sometimes we talk about technology readiness levels. That's a NASA term, a TRL, where 1 means that as far as anyone can tell, it doesn't violate some fundamental law of physics. 10 means it's on a Walmart shelf. This is completely unnecessary, this darkening of my field of view. Oh, it's late in the day. So 1 through 10, technology readiness level. So what we're talking about today is how you go from 1 to 10 in a TRL. We're going to branch into a little bit of accountability in that process. Right? Especially if you're using open source. How do you make sure that the people who are doing your work are decent at their work and you can trust what's coming out to you as it moves through the stages? And one last thought is related to the community of interest that is represented in this room, the people listening to us on the web and elsewhere. There is a model, as we heard recently, the ham radio world has integrated into ICS fairly reliably. They're also present in most hospitals during mass casualty incidents, and they are led nationally by a group called the American Radio Relay League, ARRL. I am KF7 NPQ, right? I've been doing ham for a long time, and the policies that have been embedded in legislation federally as a result of that integration are beneficial. So there is a template, there is a model. So let's recognize that if we have that as a possibility, as we look at how this community of interest gains traction, gains professionalism with the response community, let's look at how we bring challenges and potential solutions into the light of day by talking with Frank Lindsay, who is coming to us from NASA Applied Sciences, and his focus is disasters. At the next level of user sophistication, we could say it in one sense, is Will McClintock at the University of California in Santa Barbara. Beyond that is Ray Butner out of the Naval Postgraduate School, who actually takes ideas to the field and tests them. And beyond that, we have Captain Yogikas, who is actually a fire captain on the ground for Los Angeles Fire Department and has made a very long trip to be here, and thank you very much, Yo.
And
I
on a low
appreciate it.
level of sophistication.
Yeah. Well, it just has to work for you. So let's get started. And the two pieces that we're going to address, one is concept to response plan integration. What does that pathway look like? What are the pitfalls? How do you know when it's going right? How do you know when it's going wrong? And second, in an exponential domain, as we have in this field, where 20 years is way, way, way too far to think about, 10 years might be feasible, 5 years is more likely. How do you know that given what's in the pipeline coming to you, how do you look further beyond that proposed solution to the next level of problem that researchers ought to start thinking about now, right? So those two pieces, getting through the process and looking ahead, forecasting, predictive modeling. So if we could, let us please start with Frank. Could you please take a couple of minutes to describe issues that, since you're all very experienced, issues that you've seen from your position that are related to getting something from concept to implementation.
Well, thanks so much for everybody, and thanks for inviting me. I feel not as an outsider here, but coming from a slightly different type of agency than many of the good folks that have been here in the room. So I do want to start with, I'm Frank Lindsay, I'm the program manager for disasters, a title which my wife still to this day loves. Finally, there's a program she said that you're perfect for. So hopefully I have.
Mean.
Well, you know, she's a native DC person. So, but for NASA, to put it in the context of the other government agencies, NASA, of course, we're a research and engineering agency, and so we fall in kind of a funny place. That is, when Leah approached me and said research to operations, and that's a term that we use, and I can give you some examples of how we've tackled that as well. But oftentimes we don't think of ourselves very much as an operational agency. But if you sit back and think about it, of course we do. We have 5 or more people at any one time in space. We had the shuttle program. We have satellites that are orbiting the Earth. We have many, many assets that we just don't turn off and go home, or they can go down on the weekend as well. But for operations, we really rely the last mile problem on our other federal partners. For disasters, for example, it really is FEMA, USGS, and NOAA that move our development actually into the realm of which they could be the most useful. But I thought back on operations and some of the examples of getting to this question of how we've brought things from a more science realm into where they could be practically applied. And I just have a few examples of those that we've done at NASA within my program and beyond. So, for example, something that many folks don't think about, but we have obviously many assets in space that are looking at the Earth and looking at various systems and how those are operating. For example, the MODIS Rapid Response System has been very heavily used by the disaster community, and that is a satellite that we get 2 views of the whole planet every single day. And the upside of this is it is available to everyone at the time that data is actually captured at the ground as well. So you can go to earthdata.nasa.gov, and anyone in the disaster community or the public as well can gain access to those data. So as a part of that, another movement from the science world into operations has been our work within the wildfire community, which has been very successful. For one, because we have algorithms that utilize this MODIS data to find where active fires are, and there's a couple great examples of that. For one, working with the University of Maryland and NASA, we developed the algorithms to where we could detect those fires and then have a system so that in near real time we could actually get that information out to early responders or the Forest Service itself. And we've actually moved that whole capability to the U.S. Forest Service. So for us, that's a success. NASA goes on to do the next thing. We're not operational. We go on to solve the next problem, and the Forest Service has this capability that they can use every day, and certainly every fire season as well. Another spin-off of that, which I thought was equally as interesting and more to the kind of the social medium that's being discussed here today, is actually in South Africa, where they use the same system. And apparently, actually I've witnessed this myself, there are a lot of wildfires in South Africa. And a problem for them is, because of the expanse of the land, they have a lot of their their power wires that are going all over. A fire can spring up, move through them, and knock the power out. So using this MODIS system, they have a system now where if a fire is near a line, they actually get alerts on their phone so the fire responders can go out there and try to mitigate it as well. So again, these are not, that's why I wanted to frame it with operations. We're trying to move these things, but we always rely on that last handshake to actually move it out into the realm as well. I have so many. We're actually building out a real-time GPS system for ground deprivation, primarily in California, but the rim as well. And that's going to help to enable early warning, hopefully, for earthquakes events as well, maybe even some early warning prior to when events takes place within it.
I'm sorry, Frank, I missed a word in there. Ground deprivation? What was the word?
So if GPS can be very, very, very precise, so that if the ground is actually deforming, it's moving just a slight bit, that could be an indicator for where you may have an earthquake event.
Okay, so
as
go
well.
ground deformation.
Deformation.
That's
I'm
what
sorry.
I missed.
I'm sorry.
Okay,
I
no
probably misspoke
Keep
as well.
going.
And finally, because I don't want to eat up all my 5 minutes and for colleagues, another area where we've moved to operations is with our Severe network, which is a series of nodes around the world with USAID that we're putting into place so we can collate data, the models and tools, as well as information so that they can focus regionally on their issues and problems as well. So again, the things that we develop at Marshall Space Flight Center, we can move out so that they can be using these in Nepal as well. So just as a takeaway, although we are not an operational agency, because I certainly don't work on the Hill, but I hear tell that the political leaders do not like it when an agency goes off into a direction that they have not allocated the funding for them to do. So I'm very cautious about that, but we have worked with our federal partners and academia and nonprofits to move some of these things that we're doing from space, doing with our technology, to where they can use them. So as you said with the TRLs, we're very, very cognizant of moving the technologies to the point to where we can hand those off. So
And tech transfer, very nice.
tech transfer. So there's a lot more to say, but I'll end it right there.
Can you spell for people who may not be familiar with the program, the Severe program?
Well, as far as I know, it's a Spanish acronym, so you can go on the website, but it's SEVIR. So it's
Right.
not Servir, it's Servir, and my Spanish, unfortunately, maybe somebody knows what it is. But go on the website and look that up, and you'll be able to find it, or just ping me, and I can get you the information on this and any of the others, so.
Yeah, Severe is a particularly nice example of getting from concept into operations by tech transfer. Thank you very much. Well done. Well
Thank
done. Will, you have some fascinating stuff too, and visuals.
And visuals, indeed. So I'm a marine scientist, actually. I work at the University of California, Santa Barbara in the Marine Science Institute. I'm also a senior fellow with the United Nations Environment Program, World Conservation Monitoring Center, and my lab develops technologies to support essentially work in the field of marine spatial planning, so helping governments decide how to use ocean space for the purposes of conservation, fisheries management, transportation, and we're just starting to think about sort of how our technologies and approaches can be used in the field of disaster response or preparedness. So obviously we're used to working on different temporal scales, and I'm curious to know from you all how our approaches and technologies might be applied here or not. But I come from the perspective of essentially responding to a failed implementation where we tried to use science to design marine protected areas in California and failed. Essentially, we went about it the usual way, used really fantastic data and models, and sort of in a top-down approach, scientists offered to the general public in California maps, plans for where we should set up marine protected areas. And people freaked out, feeling, fishermen felt as though they were going to lose their livelihoods, and conservationists felt like too few of the habitats were being protected. So, the concept of marine protected areas didn't go anywhere. So I started developing with my lab tools that could be used by people who are not technological at all, people with no technical or scientific background, to make science-based decisions about where marine protected areas should go, and that sort of informed our thinking about tools that can be used in all kinds of spatial planning. But in other words, in essence, I'm very interested in how we can crowdsource arbitrary opinions and use those to make good science-based decisions about how we manage our ocean resources or other resources in a spatial sense. So on the tails of this failed, let me go back here. This is, it was actually animated. Never mind,
No,
it's not animated.
not.
Doesn't matter. This is a tool called Marine Map. It's a web-based application built on entirely free and open source technologies using the Google Earth API. We launched it in California about 3 years ago. It's running.
Want it to work?
It's fine. If it does, it does.
There it
If it
goes.
doesn't, it's fine. It's just eye candy, really, just to give you a
It's there
sense of
now.
how it looks. Great.
Andy's good.
So when we launched this tool, ordinary citizens in California started using this application to design marine protected areas, and they really went at it. They designed over 30,000 marine protected area designs, and each one of those was immediately and automatically analyzed using science-based metrics, basically to see how well they met science guidelines for ecosystem protection and minimizing economic impacts to fisheries. And over time, they whittled down these proposals into 128 distinct marine protected area proposals that were forwarded to the Fish and Game Commission, who signed them into law as of June 6th of this year. So it was major progress, but I guess most importantly, progress that ordinary citizens with no technical experience could take ownership of, because they actually drew the maps that were signed into law. So a couple years ago, Jack Dangerman, the CEO of Esri, came to my lab, thanks to Mike Goodchild. I think he was visiting Mike that day, and took a look at Marine Map and offered to fund the next generation of this tool, which is called Sea Sketch. Some of you saw that at lunch today. I'd be happy to demo it for those of you who haven't seen it, who would like to see it. But essentially, it's like Marine Map, kind of on steroids. It's a software service that can support any number of spatial planning operations or projects, and it has the same sort of flavor. It's a geodesign application where people can look at spatial information drawn from different sources, authoritative sources, crowdsourced data, and then use those data as a reference to draw spatial plans, analyze those plans, and share those plans in a map-based chat forum. So their chats are dynamically tied to a map along with their plans and their analytics, and essentially build support for those in that chat forum. I guess the point I want to make is that I feel like, and I think this point has been made here, that technologically speaking, we've arrived. We now have the tools that enable non-technical people to make really good, wise, science-based decisions about how we manage various resources in space. And that's good, because everybody should have the opportunity to offer their opinions about how we manage things in space, and then measure those opinions against what science is telling us we should do. So that's the good news. And the challenge, I think, is that we need to conduct science that leads to authoritative information and analytics that can be used in these kinds of tools, and then present them really in a extremely simple and engaging way. And that's, I think, harder than it sounds. And second, we need to ensure that we have policies and legislation that mandates the use of the best readily available science and stakeholder engagement in the design of spatial plans.
Nicely done. Now, do I understand that this, although it was designed for marine conservation, is applicable to any spot on the planet?
I don't see why not, yeah. We've just been using it in the marine space or the ocean space, but it's geography agnostic, I'd say.
Geography agnostic, cool. Got it. Thank you very much, Will. And you guys are keeping beautifully inside your 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And Ray, field experimentation at the Naval Postgraduate School?
Right. Is anybody else here from Department of Defense? Okay, I was feeling really lonely for a while. So we're the ones with the money in the community. But never enough, of course, for all the things that our other government agency folks have talked about process. And essentially, starting in 2002, the institution I work at, which is a graduate school, primarily for military officers, although other government civilians are always welcome, And we actually do a few contractors, and we've had occasional NGOs through, although it's a little harder for us to do that. We have to do some special permissions for that. The Naval Postgraduate School is in Monterey, California, and since 2002, about 2 hours south, we've been running a series of experiments focused primarily on the special operations community. And the idea is, how do we rapidly move technology and new ideas? And sometimes, how do we get informed about what technology and new ideas we should be studying by putting in close proximity the end users, soldiers, sailors, airmen, the science and technology people responsible for acquisition and guiding the government research piece, and the universities, the NGOs, the companies that have great ideas about how to use new technology. And we put those together, and the school had been doing that for a while. In 2009, I decided, as a tenure-seeking academic, doing something that doesn't apply to academics very much, I wanted to see if the model that we had built, the collaborative environment structure, would work for humanitarian assistance disaster relief. So we reached out to the National Defense University and Lynn Wells, who was busy with star tides, and he sent Mr. Crowley out here, and we conducted our first what we call relief project, research and experimentation for local and international emergency and first responders. And John bakes really good cookies with a solar oven, and a lot of you people look really good when you're cleaned up and dressed up. And you've probably never seen me without a hat before. So what we try to do out there is create an extreme collaboration environment. We have just enough structure to be safe, secure, and legal. I don't want any more than that, because it gets in the way of you exchanging ideas with me. And we want government, industry, NGOs sharing ideas, working together. Because we're the government, I can bring in military vehicles, other aircraft. We have restricted airspace. We can fly, drive. Someone mentioned their 200-acre facility. We have 42,000 acres available.
Yeah,
We can
Robin,
do a
take that.
lot of things out in the field. And we have access to Kennedy Space Center on the East Coast. We're DOD. We have resources. And what it turned out was the Special Operations Command, no one was paying me to do this. I was using Slack resources to do this work. It turns out they really endorse the idea. The resource-constrained environment that you live in informs most of our allies that the special operations community, in spite of the movies and the current emphasis you see from the news, is really about training partner nations. They are trainers. You talk to a Green Beret, his job is to help people become more self-sufficient in their environment, our allies primarily. Now, they have another set of jobs that we won't go into here that they're also very good at. But the special operations community is actually very supportive. The hard part was, of course, this requirements process. We're trying to take TRL levels 3 to 6. So this is a working, fieldable prototype up to starting to do an initial production prototype and gather evidence. You can't do transition unless you have a capability gap, something that needs to be fixed, because no one wants to put resources into solving a problem that doesn't exist. You need a sponsor or an end user that says, and someone talked about the NSF, you got to be working with someone who can validate that this will do it. And of course, you as a good engineer should be talking to that end user about what your design's supposed to do. And then at the end, you still need some evidence. You've got to go make an argument against other resources, other needs to say, this is what it takes to go forward. Well, how do you get evidence if you can't buy the thing until you've got a need and it's all refined? So what we try to do is create this collaborative environment where a doctor can come and talk to us about her experience trying to deal with patients where there's no way to get the information to go with the patient out to that military hospital ship. It's wonderful that it's out there, but she's down to writing in, Sharpie on the patient what she had to do to him because there's no communication channel between here and there. By the way, a thesis student has that problem solved, and we'll be demonstrating at our next relief event. So what we found was we had developed a very good way of accelerating capabilities to the battlefield, and now we've discovered this seems to work pretty good in your community too. I don't want to steal anyone else's thunder. Michael here with FEMA or John can talk to you about it, but basically our last relief event, we had a big emphasis on Civil Air Patrol, and they basically reworked their entire process for how they were going to take imagery and how they were going to share that out. And in less than a week, I guess in Isaac and 2 of the states, they employed that process and took it forward. Sometimes it's not the device that's hard. We can buy a device, but it's a capability. The government thinks in terms of capability gaps. And it can be a process solution, it can be a technology solution. We tried to build that in. So I'll be around, I'm about at my 5 minutes. I'm a professor, I can talk all day about my research. But I would invite you to come out. Our next event's gonna be October. Tomorrow in the Pentagon, I'll see if there's going to be a next event, but I'm pretty sure I'll get the funding for it. We cost about $1.5 million a year for DoD. DHS has said they will kick in and support this year, as NGA, which is really reaching hard to help your community out. And there's a couple other agencies. If we can get a shared funding pool, that's very nice for a variety of reasons. It means we can answer all of your needs and not get yanked in one direction or another with a change of leadership. Two big things. I mentioned potentially an East Coast event in Florida or AP Hill in Virginia. The other thing is in FY14, if we're funded the way I hope, we've been asked to do an international event in either Australia or the UK, where we would reach out to our folks who work over there. So that could be really interesting. Final thing, international participants. I now have a vehicle for providing funding for them to participate, especially the NGOs. It can be very difficult for you to afford to come to California and participate in an experiment. I have a vehicle. It's not unlimited, obviously. But if you're an expert and can come and contribute to the experiment, we've got a process to determine that, and we can bring you along. So thank you.
Good information. Thank you very much, Ray. And to the person that's actually on the ground every day doing the real work, Captain Gikas.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much to the Wilson Center for having me. This is, I think this is my second time, along with Chief Warner. We were both here last year around this time, and it's fascinating to watch this group work. I found today's exchange outstanding, not even just good, just outstanding. From my perspective, a little bit about me. I've got, I guess I'm in my 27th year now with the LA Fire Department. For our world visitors here today, some perspective, the LA Fire Department is probably, we're amongst the largest in this country. On any given day, I happened to go to our own website this morning. We did 1,163 incidents yesterday, and we transported 611 people to the hospital. That's every single day. 611 people, 575. It's never below 550. We run our own ambulance service and fire service. My duties today, that's a pretty big scale for our country, for you people. Are we actually broadcasting live
Yeah,
still?
we are. Yeah.
Okay. My duties at the fire department currently, I'm a platoon commander for our command and dispatch center. We have 26 firefighters on duty every day there that are dispatchers, sworn firefighter dispatchers. We have 3 captains and a battalion chief handling all the calls for the city. And up until just a few months ago, we did that from a very, very dungeness bunker 4 floors below City Hall East. We just recently activated our new center, which is where I've actually spent my last 2 years, is bringing up those systems. My background is, while I am a firefighter, and anybody that's of any rank is all firefighters, and I'm looking at Chris out there as a ground pounder. I do need to clarify that, by the way. I was asked about how much gear we weigh. How much does it weigh? Is it 75 or 100 pounds? I know it's a lot, and it was in contrast with Chief Warner, my friend who was sitting here this morning. He wears his 75 pounds in hardware on his dress uniform. Anyhow, we're pretty busy there. We just moved into our new center, and I've been spending my time, like I said, bringing up systems there. I was leading the audio-visual systems integration into the floor operation, and also trying to develop, and I think this is here where it's applicable, is decision support systems. I'm also here as a member of the National Alliance for Public Safety, GIS. I'm a very big proponent of GIS as one of the tools that can help us in the next generation. I've also responded to some of the disasters here in the country, so it's been very interesting to hear your perspective on places I've been, like Ike. I was with where's the lady from Texas Task Force 1. I got paired up with them and spent a very cold night on the Bolivar Peninsula, freezing my tuchus off. Anyhow, I was going to talk today about some projects that we've been doing, I think, that fit right into certainly the title of this section, but also maybe even bridge a gap that we've heard discussed today. And that's why are we doing all this research? What's the end result of it all? And it should be for a purpose that's been identified. And I think somebody here mentioned, are we really defining what's the problem? What do we need to be doing this for? And I think my role and the role of us practitioners, we really need to step up to the plate on that one. I don't think we really come out and know how to say what it is we need, or what's troubling us, and what we are not able to do, so that the brain power in this room can solve every problem we have today. That's not the challenge. It really is not. It's really a breakdown, I think, a breakdown in communications between us end users and the folks that are developing the solutions, including the researchers and the private companies that are going to build these products for us. So I'll try to wrap this up quickly. I know I'm running out of time. A couple of projects we've done, in my perspective, since 9/11, a lot of the grant dollars that have come down, the big ones, and we're a Tier 1 UASI, so we get a lot of money there in the state Homeland Security grant programs. They were very focused on, early on, very focused on hazmat and urban search and rescue on the fire side. Law enforcement is different, but on the fire side, that's the monies we really got. Along with a lot of practitioner groups that participate in a lot of those with S&T and other level entities to try to define those gaps that we've been discussing. And we've defined our problem. I go back to work and I continue to do my thing, and from the ground up, we come across a few very glaring needs. One of them happened to be at an event at LAX where a particular cargo hangar was giving off a reading of high radiation. So we're going to have to go inspect this thing, and we're going to suit up a firefighter and some heavy equipment and give him a meter and tell him to go in there and tell us what's bad. Well, the reality is if it's bad and his alarm goes off, well, then he's standing in the middle of it. So how reliable is that going to really be? That showed us a need. We actually had a misread by the firefighter reading that little dosimeter, if you will. I don't recall the device, but the decimal point really matters on those things. So he read it the wrong way. We launched the Armada, and very quickly, a lot of panic. A lot of people get dispatched. That's not a big deal. We can always send them home. But it really pointed out that we're relying on a guy who's very well trained. He's committed to get in there. But the pucker factor's got to be incredibly high, because if it reads bad, he's bad. He's the canary there. So we started from there. We wirelessly enabled the device. And once we got that signal back to our command post, well, now what do we do with it? And that spawned into several projects that all dovetailed back to what we defined in the beginning. That spawned into what do we do with that data? How can we get it to some smart people that know what to do with it, know how to read it, tell us how significant this thing is. And I don't want to stop on that project, but they're all very similar. And I have one that I think is a little more explanatory and a little more inclusive. Again, we defined our needs with these practitioner work groups. Somehow that translates and gets over to the research community. MITRE Corporation, they're a federally funded research and development corp. I ended up getting introduced to them because of that incident at the airport. And I met the one gentleman, Don McGarry. He's actually a paramedic. He's also a researcher. We hit it off right away. He understood a large part of what I'm talking about because of his response background, and I understood a lot about what he was doing because, truth be it, if I wasn't a firefighter, I'd be in the research community. That's where I was headed. So we talked about some of the, right there, and I think this is the key to what some of the issues we've discussed. We discussed what's ailing the fire service, what was ailing me doing my job. What do you need? Well, here, Don, here's what I do every day. I've got to put these ambulances all over the city so that they get on scene I got to get a paramedic on scene in 8 minutes. How do we do that? I've got how many paramedics do I have sitting in hospitals? That's one of my problems. I got a whole boatload of them. We have mutual aid agreements with nearby fire agencies. This is just day-to-day local stuff. This isn't with the federal government or the state government. This is just day-to-day from one county to the next, one city to the next. So we discussed all these, and I think that was the key. We talked about what these problems were. He made me define what was missing for him. He didn't tell me, as somebody pointed out, don't tell me what the solution is, tell me what the problem is. He's the senior systems engineer. I'm the, what did you call me? Unsophisticated responder. So
Not exactly.
we came so we came up with a little bit of a plan, looking at all these little troubles we have. Which ones could we attack and build off of? So after we discussed my needs, we also discussed his. What were his needs and why was he with me? Well, he works for MITRE. MITRE is an arm of the federal government, DOD and DHS, and they get their funding from that. So they're going to implement or work on DHS's needs. Well, I've told DHS what my needs are in another venue. DHS has transferred that to Don, and that is we need to have exchange of information. We've got siloed systems. We need to do that. The practitioners have developed some solutions or participated in, ended up with a thing called the Emergency Data Exchange Language, a standardized way of exchanging information. Nobody's using it. So when I met Don, he said, my job is to facilitate you practitioners actually using what you asked for. And that's the EDXL. Everybody likes it, but nobody's using it because they look around and nobody's speccing it out in their systems. So his job was to try to weave that into my solutions because that's what I've asked for. So we did that. We met up with the Hospital Association of Southern California, who tracks our hospital bed status and our emergency room diversion status. And we met, they talked about what their needs are. Well, they have a data feed that goes out. It was in a different kind of standard at the time, and when we mentioned this EDXL standard, they were very supportive and said, well, why don't we just convert our data to that? So instantly, I've got this feed of a national standard now, or international standard of EDXL, Hospital Availability Exchange, and that's coming into my center. Okay, that's good. That's one good step. Well, now I need it out in the field, and I need it into other systems, and I need to share that with other agencies that we're partners with. So in come my commercial entities, and they were very supportive, and we need that. I don't have any money. All the work I'm doing, for the most part, is after hours, if you will, or a little bit of support, but there's no real money behind this. Local governments don't have a lot of money, even though we're very large. So we developed this exchange, and we dovetail it right back into the DHS's goals. And this standardized data feed now feeds into other projects that DHS have been working on. NICS, the National Incident Command System, or Next Generation Incident Command System, I think they're calling it now. And most recently here at the the large Colorado fires that you saw, one of the commercial GIS vendors there was taking in our feed. We also enabled some other components just beside the hospital status. But they were taking in our feed in a standardized way. So we built it one time, we got to use it over and over again, and in essence, all the goals that I needed were met. I've got the data, I can share it with everybody, and everybody else's needs are met as well. And I think that, I know I'm going over time here, but I think that is really the biggest gap that I've seen today is from me to you, or from me to the commercial vendor. What are the real defined problems that we're trying to face? And they're not nearly as complex as the capacity of you folks to solve them, in my opinion. So, thank you.
Nicely stated. Thank you very much. Before I bring up the questions that I would like to pursue, let's go out to the crowd. Questions? Really? There you
A quick yay.
go. Okay. Actually, you were first, sir. We can get a mic to that gentleman. That mic is not on. Can you shout, please, and we'll repeat the question for the web people.
So I work in crisis management, and we've been looking at, we collect a lot of data. With the fires in Colorado, we collected over 45,000 square kilometers, and what we realized is we really need to improve that last mile. So we've been working with partners, and we integrated into a partner called Intera. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Company I'm referring to, they're one of our partners as well.
So for the first time at Waldo Canyon, we collected at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, the day after that fire made its run on the neighborhoods. And 2 hours later, that imagery was in the incident command, allowing them to make their decisions, prepare, communicate, do damage assessment. But just feeding on to what the panel is talking about, so one way we're really trying to push to improve our technology and build out the workflow based on the requirements of the community. So I don't know, is that was the technology that you used as well?
Well, what you saw from Intera was a few things. You probably saw Range and Bearing as another company. They can take an IR flight over a fire and determine the perimeter based on the difference in the heat sense. But as far as Intera and us, we are an Intera owner, if you will. We have their product. What we developed with them early on, though, was their acceptance of an EDXL data stream. So when we not only built the Hospital Availability Exchange, MITRE also came in, our next project. They came in and built an adapter to our computer-aided dispatch system to take out incident data and unit status data and put it into an EDXL standard, as well as it's called Cursor on Target. We tried to use standards wherever we could. And MITRE, their history, they've got a lot of history in using data and developing data standards. So I think the significance there with Intera was that they became compliant with the EDXL suite of standards, and they were able to pull that feed in very quickly. Same thing with the NICS. It was literally a few hours that we were able to do this versus what would have taken maybe months in the past. And then you've probably built a custom interface that's only usable at one time. Now you've built something. I don't think I need to preach here about standards. I mean, 17-inch tires work really well. And you know, look around our lives. Standards is what makes us as successful as we are. And old, old independent custom interfaces, one-time uses. That's got to be a stale model.
Good perspective. Now, from all four of you, I have heard basically what are commercial or proprietary tools. Do any of the four of you have an open source example that has made it from early to late development successfully?
Yeah, so Marine Map was a tool that was built entirely on free and open source software. It was a really complicated stack, and we did our best. I think we documented it very well, and it was up and available for people to grab and use as they wanted, but it didn't proliferate in our field anyway, in marine spatial planning. I think in part because it was such a large, complicated stack that required customization for it to be really useful. Lots of customization in 4 or 5 different languages. So it didn't turn out to be a really good development model for us in that way. The tool was really good, but it wasn't adopted well beyond our use. And I think, and I have limited experience in developing in the open source world, but I get the sense that those things that are really successful in being adopted in the open source world are small widgets, things that can be kind of put together into new forms, small bits of code or limited amounts of code. We had hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and that kind of behemoth isn't something that your average developer or even group of developers can grab and use. So we've kind of moved now to the mixed model of using some proprietary code for the software service that we're offering, maintaining that ourselves in the lab, and then opening up the analytics as open source, because each of those kind of analytical plugins into this software service that could be used for whatever spatial planning process you want, those are probably going to be 200 lines of code and things that are easily recycled and tweaked and modified by individual developers.
Okay, that's good to hear. Thank you. Sarah Jane?
I was just going to comment on that. It's not so much it's small code, it's easy to install code. So if you put up a stack that you can install with one click, or if you've got something like CrowdMap, Ushahidi learnt this one fairly early, then it gets adopted. The tech fear is huge. And a quick thank you. Please go to England. I've been working on their MOD for the last year, trying to get them to adopt a relief style thing if you just turn up.
It might happen. Could I kind of address that one
Of course,
as well?
of course.
So one thing I want to be careful about, the Naval Postgraduate School working with NDU creates the environment. I don't want this to sound like we get credit for any of the things that came out. It's the participants that come in and do it. But we do have open source software folks working from management systems out of Indonesia. I don't want to get into branding names because I don't know where they're at, but Sahana folks came out. And what we found was, if it's easy to do it, you can add capability to these things. And the power of the open source community, if you already have a community built around it, is very good. I wouldn't go to anything the government built as open source and ask me to use. If a community is using it, I would view that very differently. The model and the philosophy behind there, and I'm probably, oddly for a DoD guy, least trusting of the government being the solution. In fact, I was a little uncomfortable the way we talk. Even the first responders are not the first customer here. It's the affected population. And their job, what they do, they are right there at it. So that's where we're going to get our best data. But the open source community has huge potential to do that, and it gets past political boundaries about my government and your government, because something like Sahana's in 17 different languages, and they're using it in the Philippines, they're using it in Africa, and there's other products. Like I said, I don't want to go into that, but we try to create an environment where the folks who have the problem and the people who could develop that widget that can be added to that capability that now enables a community that couldn't afford to wait. Even LA's relatively rich, it's a big city, but they're poor on a federal level. But it's tough. You know, money's important at each of these jurisdictions all the way around. Our folks in Monterey County are struggling to deal with some of the same problems, and we've showed them things like OpenStreetMaps and some of these other tools that are out there that have been developed in a different way and have a very different business model for spreading and take care of them. So I think it's an important thing. If you try to build and enforce an open standard solution out of the government, I think that's almost, or a single university, I think that's really tough. But I do think it's an important model here. I really think the model should be information's flowing freely, the government dips in and out to fulfill its purposes. It doesn't try to control who gets to say what and how they say it. Standards for information and data exchange are very important. The research question, if we all had a shared open standard that here's the 2,000 items that we like to collect, and after our things we just shoved it into that format, or we wrote widgets that could put our data into that format, we don't have to manually do this anymore, right? Then we'd start to build a collective base of knowledge to share. And I actually have federal librarians that I'm willing to pay to figure out how do they make that available to all of you forever, because even as a good research university, I don't keep up with the virtual machine or the code that can run something 10 years from now. When my research project's going, I move on to the next one. All that data dies. I mean, it might still be on a server somewhere, but it becomes inaccessible to everyone. So if we don't get librarians and archivists involved professionally in this, we will keep relearning painful lessons again and again, because we don't get the adequate data that's necessary for a deep researcher to apply that with that reproducibility and the good science that goes with the type of model you're doing down there. You know, good science behind it, social adaptation to fit the purpose. We need good data for that. Geological data is less controversial than some of the stuff you guys work with. So, sorry,
True.
I didn't mean to go
good,
on. But.
Good information, and I haven't heard talk. Sure,
I could add
sure,
just
sure.
one comment. While you mentioned the solution was proprietary, the application, the end user application was proprietary, but any one of these end user applications could consume an open feed. While we owned the feed, it was built on open standards, and the code to do that was open. So that's what made it so simple. All they had to do was plug in.
Good
In
information.
multiple applications, whether they be analytical or, in this case, a tactical type tool. And it was mentioned in one of the first sessions this morning, talking about open up your data, don't necessarily create an app. And I think that's what we were trying to do, is open up our data.
We just had an open data for governance meeting at the World Bank about a month ago, where we learned about places like Moldova, a place I actually had to look up. They're doing a fantastic job at e-government and transparency, using open data for everything that they're doing inside their government. But over to John.
I wanted to make a quick follow-up to Ray in terms of the open source question. A lot of the work that we do out at Camp Roberts in terms of the relief program is a little different. Is actually very different than a lot of what agencies are currently doing. There's a lot of codeathons where we're seeing if we want to take an idea from like a TRL level 1 to maybe we get it in a weekend to 3. Maybe they take it from 2 to 4 or 3 to 4. But there's really not a whole lot to do in taking it from that prototype and bringing it into something that can actually be put out in terms of either commercial use or put out into a live community for open source. That environment is something that's almost unique to relief, is that going from 4 to 6 and having enough sustained time to do that. I think in every example we've taken in code that's started at a 4 or 5 and then moved it up the chain, not over 1 week, but usually over multiple quarters with code that happens in between. So I think agencies really need to understand that this is not we'll just catalyze open source developers over a weekend and we'll have a new tool, which seems to be the dominant model, but it is actually something that requires a year and a half of work, and oftentimes you have very specific capability gap you're trying to build over that time. The most important bit is the relationships behind it and the community that's grown up around it. And I think it would be really illustrative. How many people in this room have been out to Camp Roberts So you have a community of folks that have really begun over time. Many of them have been out multiple times. That trust and that relationship is core to building this transfer.
Riley?
Riley Eller, Coco Communications, Leviathan Security, Safety Mesh Technologies, and Geeks Without Bounds. I've taken products now to TRL 9 and 8 with various sponsors. Have anybody on this panel ever heard of a non-commercial TRL 8 project? Because I can't imagine. I mean, I truly can't imagine. Seriously, if we get honest, you're not ever, ever, ever going to rely on a tool unless there's someone behind it who's personally responsible to carry that knowledge forward to the next generation and the next version and the next version. So I think it's important that we, kind of separate the idea of free and open source technology, which is ideas encoded in a digital form, between that and a product, which essentially has to have a producer. I hear a lot of people talk about open source products, and I don't know that any of those exist. I know tons of open source technologies and technologists, and those are the people you get. But it seems to me like it needs to become clear to people that either a university or an agency or a corporation becomes the home and the owner and the person for that widget, that view, that pipe, that component of the solution. Thanks all.
Riley, help me with that distinction. So when we talk about Red Hat, or we talk about Ubuntu, or we talk about Sahana, or we talk about Ushahidi, in what way are those open source products?
So Linux is an open source technology.
Okay,
Red Hat is a corporation.
agreed.
Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.2 is a TRL 10 product. The modern versions of Red Hat are not. If you're going to deploy Red Hat to let's say some defense customers, you will deploy version 6.2 because you will not get NSA certification otherwise. Because that version has gone through the amazing pain that goes from 6 to 10. 1 to 6 is cute, and we've knocked those out in a few months, but 6 to 10 is nearly impossible. It's millions of dollars of work, documentation, STIGs at DISA, NSA certification, process conformance, maturity models. These are all things that you have to invest in. So I just wanted to provide the view that sometimes if you're going to talk about the process really has to be how are we going to fund the smallest number of components that let people like Yo get his job done. And then how do we make those as flexible as possible to get to open data initiatives and get the data in the field, in situ, at Camp Roberts. Plugging in the data source can be something that we get very creative about, but I don't want people, I think it's really horrible when people start looking out to volunteers, thinking that the components, the widgets, the data views especially, are ever going to be a truly ready and truly free volunteer-based technology. I just don't think you can get fully ready and have no responsibility. And so from NASA especially, I think what I've always heard is, no, your ideas are neat, but we really need you to get through the program.
Well, we're off the hook. Perhaps you've heard of the Sky Crane.
Yes.
I wonder if that was the thing that landed Curiosity on Mars. I don't know if that was a TRL 10. Obviously, it was high enough for them to have confidence that we were not going to have another smoking hole in the surface of Mars. But again, that's why I put my initial text in research versus operations, where, I don't want to say it. We can fail as NASA. We can test some things out, and hopefully some of those technologies feed back to our defense partners and others that can take some of these things that you're absolutely right, that we don't have to worry about, getting it all to the way where the public would use that. For example, on the research side, we don't fund proprietary algorithms. The science community has to see it. All of our algorithms are open for people to look at. I know companies cannot stay in business if they have the same model as well. So again, we get off the hook. But as I said, we're not research, but we like to think that those technologies get fed even into the commercial marketplace where they could actually use it well. And so far, that has been very successful. I'll say one last thing, though, that we also have limitations because of ITAR, because a lot of our really cool technologies for security reasons cannot be given out. The other is we have things like FFRDCs, JPL, which is Caltech. And we embrace open source. We have an open source summit. However, there are intellectual property issues that we also butt up against as well. But your comment about this complex tax, it does resonate with us that we have very complex systems, and to build those solely upon open source can be very problematic, because as these moving parts change and aren't supported, that puts even our research systems at risk. It's a very, very difficult, you raise a good point, it's a very difficult problem, so.
Actually, I'd like to address that too. There are kind of two different pieces there. So the Red Hat model, for example. So there has to be someone, when you choose to use it for an application, you need some mechanism, internal expertise, contracted expertise. There's going to be something appropriate to the level of trust and your reliance on that material. If it's high reliance, it's going to be an extreme amount. If I'm going to bring it into the government's information enclave and do PII or classified information, then I've got another set of wickets for. I think this community especially, thinking on an international basis, should not be trying to build a system that operates inside the US government. There's a boundary over which information flows. And I think there is a role, and I think it's not the business model that we're used to. I agree with you absolutely. But one of the things we've looked at is and I've advocated for the US government to provide some of these open source tools to our allies. And effectively, we hire contract organizations who are experts in this type of thing that become the tech support that help those folks rely appropriately for the level use they're doing on it. We don't have to force everything into an NSA compliant, high reliability solution. What we're competing against is how we do it now, not the perfect ideal requirement. And so I think there is more fuzz there. But I mean, you're absolutely right. If you're trying to sell something to DoD, they want to know who's going to take care of it. That high TRL says, whose belly button do I go to when it doesn't work? And they want the documentation to support that. But I do think there's room, and I think this is one of the things that's changing with the social media, because the US government, some of the folks that I teach, the young military officers, they're exchanging information rapidly to get the job done on the battlefield, and they're not using the government systems because the government systems won't work for them. But you gave them cell phones, or they've got their own, and they're getting the job done that way. So we see this creeping past the boundary. It's become too rigid in some degree. So hopefully there'll be some flex. Always, you're going to have to make a decision about the risk versus benefit and how much you're relying on it and the particular instances of it. But I think being open source doesn't necessarily make it less reliable. Posting it and having people read it and lots of people think about it, that's a good model. Having nobody that takes care of it and it can change at any time, that's a different set of problems. So to deal with. But yeah, I do think there's room. I think that's where some of these technologies, the edge is, there's an opportunity as our social systems are evolving with it, we're using the technologies differently. There's room for building on these. And I know local communities are using these because they're inexpensive and there's enough tech support available with some of the small companies that are behind them, but there's still someone they can go to. Without that, I would agree it won't go anywhere.
So before you leave on that thought, Captain Gikas has described that the formalizing of the loop between those far forward and those doing the research can be a valuable and perhaps underutilized opportunity. In Agile and Scrum, we talk about people sitting right next to the users as the development is being done. Can you talk for a moment about sandboxes?
Right. So the idea, if you think of a cycle where there's policy, there's the action or the event that you do, and then we're collecting data, and we're going to analyze that. Hopefully that's what's happening in the research universities. You come up with a lot of neat ideas, and you need a place to put those seemingly bright ideas from us crazy scientists next to the firemen who, how do we bridge that gap? And part of it is really understanding the context. So the idea of the sandbox, and the reason we created Relief and we do that minimal structure thing, is so that we get the local fire and police folks to come out, and we get the Montana Fire Center sends their people out, and we try to figure out how do we use these technologies developed maybe for the military to find the edge of a fire boundary. How do we use the WMD non-proliferation tools that we developed to try to find radiology sources that people are trying to hide over here to help in the port in our major cities. So we try to put those people together in the sandbox with enough protection. So we'll have 100 companies in the field interacting openly with the government. It's not a trade show.